In September 1940, London stood at the edge of destruction. The German Luftwaffe had launched a relentless bombing campaign against the British capital. Every night, the skies above the city were filled with the drone of engines, the flash of explosions, and the glow of burning buildings. It was the height of the Blitz, Adolf Hitler's attempt to break Britain's will through fear and fire. But amidst that chaos, one man's decision in the sky would become a lasting symbol of defiance. That man was Flight Lieutenant Raymond Towers Holmes, a 29-year-old pilot of the Royal Air Force. Born in 1914 in Wallasey, England, Holmes had joined the RAF Volunteer Reserve before the outbreak of the war. By 1940, he was flying Hawker Hurricanes with No. 504 Squadron, defending London from incoming German bombers. Like many of his fellow pilots, Holmes had only a few hundred hours of flying experience, and every sortie was a fight for survival. On the morning of September 15, 1940, the day later remembered as Battle of Britain Day, German bombers and fighters appeared in massive formations over the English Channel. The Luftwaffe launched over 1,500 aircraft towards southern England, aiming to deliver a decisive blow to London. For the RAF, it was one of the largest and most desperate days of the war. Airfields across southern Britain scrambled their fighters to intercept the incoming enemy waves. Ray Holmes took off from RAF Hendon in his Hurricane, call sign GNF. His mission was simple but dangerous: intercept enemy bombers heading towards central London. The sky soon filled with contrails, smoke, and flashes of machine gun fire. At 20,000 feet, hundreds of aircraft engaged in a swirling, chaotic battle, one that would decide whether Britain's capital would burn. As Holmes climbed into the fray, he spotted a formation of Dornier D-17 bombers, the so-called flying pencils. They were fast, narrow aircraft carrying bombs meant for key government buildings. Holmes dove to attack. He fired bursts of .303 caliber rounds, aiming at the nearest Dornier. He managed to damage one of its engines before pulling up to avoid collision. But soon his ammunition ran out. His guns fell silent. Then, through the smoke, Holmes noticed one Dornier breaking through the defending RAF line. It was heading straight towards central London, toward Buckingham Palace itself. The bomber was already damaged, its tail smoking, but it kept flying. Holmes realized that if the German pilot succeeded, the palace, the symbolic heart of Britain's monarchy, would be hit in broad daylight. He knew he had no bullets left to stop it. What he decided to do next would make history. Holmes leveled his Hurricane and aimed directly at the Dornier. With no weapons remaining, his only option was to ram the enemy aircraft. It was an act almost certain to destroy his own plane, and possibly kill him. But he did not hesitate. At full speed, he closed the distance and struck the bomber's tail with the wing of his Hurricane. The impact tore both aircraft apart in midair. Fragments of metal and fabric scattered across the London skyline. The Dornier split into pieces and crashed near Victoria Station. Its bombs detonated on impact, killing the crew and destroying nearby buildings. Holmes's Hurricane was badly damaged. It spun out of control, trailing smoke and debris. Holmes bailed out at around 5,000 feet. His parachute deployed just in time, and he drifted down into the streets of Chelsea. He landed relatively unhurt, though shaken, near the site of his crash. His Hurricane slammed into the ground not far from Buckingham Palace, within sight of the very target he had saved. The dramatic event was witnessed by thousands of Londoners who were watching the battle from rooftops and parks. Many saw the two planes collide above the city and thought the RAF pilot had sacrificed his life. When they learned he had survived, Holmes became an instant hero, the man who saved the palace and perhaps the royal family itself. Holmes was taken to safety by local civilians. When he returned to his squadron later that day, he was treated with quiet admiration by his comrades. Though the RAF officially discouraged ramming tactics, considering them too risky and wasteful, the story of his act quickly spread through the ranks. It became a symbol of the desperate courage of the few, the RAF pilots who held the line against overwhelming odds. In the aftermath, journalists tried to find details of the event. The British government, careful about wartime morale, allowed limited coverage. Newspapers published brief mentions of an RAF pilot who had brought down a German bomber by unconventional means. His name was withheld at first, but soon became known. Flight Lieutenant Ray Holmes was celebrated in both British and Allied newspapers as an embodiment of self-sacrifice and bravery. Holmes himself, however, refused to call his act heroic. He described it as a simple decision made in seconds, one driven by necessity. In later interviews, he said, "I thought, if I can stop him, even if I have to hit him, that's what I'll do." It was not about glory, it was about preventing one more bomb from falling on London. The day of September 15, 1940, turned out to be a turning point. The Luftwaffe lost 56 aircraft, while the RAF lost 28. The scale of the German defeat forced Hitler to postpone his invasion plans, Operation Sea Lion, indefinitely. It was clear that Britain would not fall easily. Holmes's ramming attack became one of the most symbolic individual actions of that day. In the following weeks, Holmes was debriefed and examined by RAF command. His superiors confirmed his report, and witnesses on the ground corroborated the event. Pieces of his Hurricane and the Dornier were recovered from crash sites across London. The incident was classified for some time, as officials feared the Germans might use it for propaganda. But among RAF pilots, the story circulated widely, proof that even unarmed, a British pilot would never yield. After the ramming, Holmes was taken to a nearby hospital for examination. Apart from minor bruises and shock, he was unharmed. His parachute had saved him from certain death. Within hours, RAF intelligence officers interviewed him about the incident. Holmes calmly described how he had run out of ammunition, sighted the bomber heading for Buckingham Palace, and made the decision to ram it. The officers wrote a detailed report, noting that his courage had prevented a likely direct hit on the palace or surrounding buildings. The remains of the Dornier Do-17 were scattered over the area near Victoria Station. Investigators later determined that the bomber had been on its final bombing run, with its payload still intact. The detonation on impact destroyed much of the evidence, but fragments of the aircraft, including its tail section, were recovered and photographed. Civil defense workers cleared the wreckage under continuous threat of further raids, while Londoners gathered to stare at the blackened remains of what had nearly been a catastrophe. Holmes's Hurricane had crashed only a short distance away. The impact gouged a crater in the road, but caused no fatalities on the ground. In the following days, pieces of his aircraft were quietly collected by souvenir hunters. Children in Chelsea claimed to own a bit of the plane that saved the king's house. For them, the pilot who fell from the sky was more than a soldier. He was proof that someone was fighting for them directly above their heads. The event took place on one of the most decisive days of the Battle of Britain. The German Air Force had thrown all its strength into breaking London's defenses. Yet the RAF, outnumbered but better coordinated, inflicted heavy losses. Prime Minister Winston Churchill observed part of the battle from the operations room at RAF Uxbridge. When informed that the Luftwaffe had suffered severe losses, he turned to his staff and said the words that became immortal. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Holmes was one of those few. In the weeks that followed, Holmes continued to serve with the RAF. Despite the loss of his aircraft, he was back in the air within days, assigned to training and escort duties. He remained modest about the incident, even avoiding public attention. When asked about the ramming, he replied, "It was the only thing left to do." Officially, he received no medal specifically for that act, though he was commended for bravery in the line of duty. The RAF's focus remained on collective victory, not individual exploits. By the end of 1940, the tide of the Battle of Britain had turned. The Luftwaffe shifted from daylight raids to night bombing, conceding that it could not defeat Fighter Command in open combat.
Holmes's act, though small in the scale of the entire campaign, became part of the growing legend that Britain had survived through determination and courage. In propaganda leaflets and broadcasts, stories of lone pilots defending their homeland were used to inspire the public. Among them, Holmes' ramming of the Dornier was often cited, though not always by name, as an example of the unbreakable spirit of the RAF. After the war, Holmes left active service and became a journalist. He worked for several British newspapers and magazines, covering aviation and public affairs. He rarely spoke about his wartime experience, considering it part of his duty rather than heroism. Only in later years, as public interest in the Battle of Britain grew, did he begin to share his recollections more openly. In 2004, a remarkable discovery brought Holmes's story back into the public eye.
Archaeologists and aviation historians, using radar and excavation equipment, located the remains of his Hurricane in a street near Buckingham Palace. The recovery attracted national attention. As the twisted fragments were lifted from the ground, television cameras recorded the moment. The wreckage was remarkably well preserved, and forensic analysis confirmed the identity of the aircraft. Hurricane PZ-865, flown by Flight Lieutenant Ray Holmes on September 15, 1940. Holmes himself, then 90 years old, attended the excavation. Standing beside the crater that once marked his crash site, he smiled modestly as he looked at the remains of the plane he had last seen spiraling toward the Earth more than 6 decades earlier. To reporters, he said quietly, "It was just a job. We all did what we had to do." His humility, as much as his bravery, impressed the public. He died later that same year, on June 27, 2005. The RAF honored him posthumously at memorial ceremonies marking the 65th anniversary of the Battle of Britain. To many, Holmes represented a generation of ordinary men who performed extraordinary acts when faced with impossible choices. Modern historians continue to debate the exact details of the collision. Some records suggest that Holmes's Hurricane struck the Dornier's tailplane, others that the impact was between the wing and fuselage. Whatever the precise mechanics, the outcome remains clear. The German bomber was destroyed before it could reach its target, and Buckingham Palace was spared. The Queen Mother, who was in residence at the time, reportedly expressed gratitude to the RAF pilots protecting London. Though she may never have met Holmes personally, his action became part of the wider story of national resilience. In later analyses of the Battle of Britain, Holmes's ramming is often cited as one of the very few deliberate aerial collisions by an RAF pilot. Soviet pilots would later use similar tactics on the Eastern Front, but in 1940, such an act was virtually unprecedented in Western air combat. It demonstrated how thin the margin of defense had become. When ammunition and altitude ran out, courage was the only weapon left. Today, parts of Holmes's Hurricane are preserved in museums and private collections. One of the propeller blades recovered from the site is displayed at the Imperial War Museum in London, bearing silent witness to that desperate moment in the sky. The story has been retold in documentaries, exhibitions, and books about the Blitz, always framed as an example of human determination under fire. From a broader historical perspective, Holmes's action encapsulated the essence of the Battle of Britain. It was not about technology nor numbers, but about willpower. The British pilots of 1940 fought not just to defend territory, but to preserve the idea that a small island nation could resist tyranny through collective courage. Holmes's decision, made in seconds and with no chance of survival guaranteed, mirrored the spirit of the entire campaign. 80 years later, the image of 2 aircraft colliding above London remains one of the most striking episodes of the war. The black and white photographs of the burning Dornier and the scattered wreckage on London streets continue to appear in archives and exhibitions. They remind modern viewers that history is often shaped not by grand strategies or vast armies, but by individuals faced with impossible choices. For Ray Holmes, it was a moment of instinct, a brief intersection of duty, danger, and fate. He did not see himself as a hero, yet his decision saved the symbolic heart of Britain at one of its darkest hours. When he hit that bomber above the Capitol, he could not have known that generations later, his act would still be remembered as one of the defining symbols of the RAF stand in 1940. His name may not appear alongside the great commanders of the war, but his legacy endures every time the story of the Battle of Britain is told. It serves as a reminder that even when weapons fail, resolve can still prevail. Flight Lieutenant Raymond Holmes's sacrifice did not just save a building, it saved a symbol, and with it, the spirit of a nation.